In 1948, a factory in a small Canadian city was producing 10,000 tractors a year. It employed 4,200 people. Its machines were feeding half a continent. The family who built it had a member serving as the Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the King's representative in Canada's most powerful province. 14 years later, the entire thing was gone, sold to strangers, stripped for parts, the name erased. And here's the part that'll keep you watching. It wasn't because they failed. They didn't go bankrupt. They didn't make a bad product. What happened to Cockshutt farm equipment is one of the most ruthless corporate assassinations in Canadian history, and almost nobody talks about it. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand how a family built an empire from a single plow, how that empire changed farming forever, how shadowy financiers killed it in broad daylight, and why the wreckage is still smoldering on a contaminated lot in Ontario right now. Let's go back to the beginning. The year is 1877. Canada is only 10 years old. Confederation is still fresh. Out west, the prairies are a wall of unbroken sod stretching from Manitoba to the Rockies. Millions of acres of the richest farmland on Earth, and almost no way to work it. The soil out there wasn't like anything in Ontario or Quebec. Prairie sod was so thick, so dense, so tangled with root systems that conventional plows just bounced off. Into this problem walks a 29-year-old named James G. Cockshutt. Now, James didn't come from nothing. His father, Ignatius Cockshutt, was a wealthy Brantford merchant, sharp with money, respected in town. But James didn't want to sell dry goods. He wanted to build things. So he opened a tiny workshop called the Brantford Plow Works and started making stoves, scufflers, and simple walking plows. And he made himself a promise that would define the next 85 years. Every single item would be built so well that its reputation alone would grow the company. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, just obsessive quality. Here's how obsessive. The next year, 1878, he purchased a license to manufacture something called the Wired Junior Malleable Beam Plow. That plow was so perfectly designed that Cockshutt sold it completely unchanged for 53 consecutive years. Let that land for a second. One product, no modifications, 53 years of continuous sales. That's not a plow, that's a masterpiece. But James was just getting started. He began inventing new models with chilled iron mold boards, specifically engineered to slice through that brutal prairie sod. And one model, the JGC riding plow, became so legendary among Western settlers that it earned a nickname. Farmers called it the plow that opened the West. Think about what that means. Every wheat field in Saskatchewan, every cattle ranch in Alberta, every homestead in Manitoba. Thousands of families feeding themselves and feeding a young nation, and a massive number of them were dragging a Cockshutt behind their horses. But here's the tragedy embedded in the triumph. James Cockshutt never saw how big his dream would become. He contracted tuberculosis and died just months before his JGC patent was officially registered. He was gone, but the family wasn't about to let his vision die with him. After James died, his father Ignatius stepped in as vice president. His brother William Foster became president. Then another brother, Frank, took the reins in 1888. This wasn't a corporation in the modern sense. This was a family passing a torch, generation to generation, each one building on the last. And they built fast. By 1903, the factory had grown to cover 23 acres, and trade publications were calling it the most complete plow factory in North America. Not just Canada, the continent. They were making everything: disc plows, seeders, swathers, gang plows big enough to be pulled by steam-powered tractors. If it touched soil, Cockshutt probably made a version of it, and that version was probably better than what anyone else offered. But the real transformation came when the youngest brother walked through the door. Henry Cockshutt, Harry, to the people who knew him, became president in 1910, and he was different. James had been the dreamer. William and Frank had been the caretakers. But Harry? Harry was the empire builder. First thing he did, secured outside financing. Until Harry, Cockshutt Plow had been entirely family funded. They famously conserved cash and never went to banks. But Harry saw what was coming. He used the new capital to acquire the Adams Wagon Company, the Brantford Carriage Company, and a 1/3 interest in the Frost and Wood Company. Overnight, Cockshutt Plow went from a tillage company to a full-line agricultural equipment manufacturer. They had plows, wagons, carriages, harvesting equipment, the works, and they had a dealer network stretching across the prairies. Now here's where this story takes a turn you won't expect. Harry Cockshut didn't just run a company, he ran a province. In 1899, he was elected mayor of Brantford. During World War I, he organized and commanded the 215th Infantry Battalion. And in 1921, the Prime Minister appointed him Lieutenant Governor of Ontario, the Crown's representative in the province. He literally became the face of the king in Canada's most important region. Imagine that, the head of a plow company, sitting in Government House, representing royalty. That's how significant the Cockshut name had become. And Harry didn't hoard the prestige. He opened Government House to the public for the first time, let charities use the rooms for meetings, and used his connections to develop Northern Ontario. This family wasn't just making money, they were building Canada. But every empire has a clock ticking somewhere in the background. And Cockshut's clock was about to start counting down, triggered by something nobody expected: a world war. When World War II erupted, Cockshut did what a lot of Canadian manufacturers did. They converted. The factory that had been cranking out plows started producing war materials, aircraft parts, munitions components, whatever Ottawa needed. But here's what made Cockshut different from nearly every other wartime manufacturer. While they were building equipment to win the war, they were simultaneously designing the machine that would define the peace. Deep inside the Brantford plant, a team of engineers was secretly working on something radical. A tractor built from scratch, entirely Canadian designed, with a feature that no production tractor in the world had ever offered. It was called the Cockshut Model 30. And when the war ended and the Model 30 finally rolled into production in 1946, it dropped a bomb on the tractor industry. Because the Model 30 was the first production tractor on the planet equipped with live power takeoff. Now, if you're not a farm person, that might sound like jargon. Let me explain why it was revolutionary. Before live PTO, the power shaft on a tractor, the spinning rod that drives your baler, your mower, your combine, was connected to the clutch. That meant every time you stopped the tractor's forward motion, the power shaft also stopped. Your baler jammed, your mower choked. You had to get off, unclog the machine, restart, and pray it didn't happen again 40 feet later. Live PTO changed everything. It drove the power shaft directly from the engine's flywheel. Stop the tractor, power shaft keeps spinning. Full power to your implement all the time, no matter what. That's it. That's simple. And Cockshut did it first. Within a decade, every major tractor manufacturer in the world had copied live PTO. Today, it's so universal that nobody even remembers the old problems. But in 1946, it was like inventing the smartphone of farming. And a small Canadian company in Brantford, Ontario, beat John Deere, beat International Harvester, beat Massey Harris, beat everyone to it. The Model 30 was gorgeous too. Vermilion red with cream white wheels and lettering. Only 441 units were built in that first year of 1946. By 1947, they were making over 6,200. And in 1948, 10,665 tractors. The factory was running at full tilt, employing thousands. And then Cockshut did something brilliant to break into the American market. They had no dealer network in the United States, zero presence south of the border. So in 1945, they signed marketing agreements with the National Farm Machinery Cooperative and with farmer-owned co-ops across 11 states. The Model 30 was repainted pumpkin orange, relabeled as the Co-op E3, and shipped to the Midwest. They even sent one to the University of Nebraska for testing, and it crushed the performance benchmarks. Suddenly, Cockshut wasn't just Canada's tractor. It was feeding America too. The company added the smaller Model 20, the mid-range 35, the larger 40 and 50, and in 1958 they unveiled the crown jewel, the 500 series, models 540, 550, 560, and 570. Everyone totally new from the ground up. And here's the detail that shows you how seriously Cockshut took everything. The sheet metal for the 500 series was designed by Raymond Loewy. Yes, that Raymond Loewy, the man who designed the Studebaker Starliner, the Coca-Cola vending machine, the Lucky Strike cigarette pack, the interior of Skylab, arguably the most important industrial designer of the 20th century. And he was drawing tractors for a company out of Brantford, Ontario. The 500 series set a new standard in modern styling. They weren't just machines, they were beautiful. Meanwhile, the carriage and wagon division, Brantford Coach and Body, had quietly become the largest truck body and semi-trailer manufacturer in all of Canada. By the late 1950s, Cockshut was developing radial combines, hydrostatic tractors, pushing the boundaries of what a small company could achieve. They were profitable, they were innovative, they were beloved by farmers from Manitoba to Montana, and they were about to be murdered. Here's where the story turns dark. In 1958, a company called English Transcontinental, described as a British mercantile bank, began quietly buying up Cockshut stock on the open market. Not a lot at first, just enough to go unnoticed. The Cockshut board of directors noticed eventually, but they weren't alarmed. In fact, they thought it was great news. Here was a respectable English bank investing in a Canadian company. What could be more reassuring? Bill Cockshut, a family member who later wrote about the experience, described the moment reality hit. "My uncle and the board of directors thought it was a wonderful idea. Here's an English bank that wants to put money into Canada. And then we found out that they were not who they said they were." English Transcontinental was a front. Behind the British bank was an American investment group whose entire business model was simple and savage. Buy companies, strip them, sell the pieces. They were financial predators, and they had Cockshut in their sights. It happened so suddenly that nobody knew what was happening until they arrived on the scene and said, "We own 1/3 of your company," Bill recalled. 1/3, just like that, enough to seize control. An 85-year-old family enterprise, profitable and innovative, swallowed in a hostile stock market takeover by people who had zero interest in building tractors, zero interest in Canadian farming, zero interest in anything except extracting maximum cash from maximum assets in minimum time. The family was devastated. Generations of Cockshuts had poured their lives into this company, from James's little workshop in 1877 to Harry's empire of 50 acres and 4,200 workers. And now strangers were sitting in the boardroom. What happened next was a cascade of destruction. The new owners took Cockshut farm equipment and sold the farm machinery division to the White Motor Company of Cleveland, Ohio in January 1962. White had already bought the Oliver Corporation in 1960. They'd soon gobble up Minneapolis Moline in 1963. White's strategy was efficient and cold. Cease all manufacturing in Brantford immediately. Shut down the Canadian production lines that had been running for 8 decades. But keep the name, because Cockshut had 80 years of brand loyalty baked into the prairies, and that loyalty was worth something. So from 1964 to 1969, Cockshut tractors were still sold, but they weren't Cockshuts. They were Oliver tractors built in Charles City, Iowa, wearing red paint and a Cockshut badge, a disguise, a ghost wearing a dead company's face. The Cockshut 1650, an Oliver 1650 in different paint, the Cockshut 1850, Oliver, the 1350, that was actually a Minneapolis Moline Jetstar 3. Even the small Cockshut 1265 was a Fiat diesel import. Nothing was real anymore. The name was a marketing shell draped over other companies' machines, and the name itself didn't last. In 1969, White merged everything, Cockshut, Oliver, Minneapolis Moline, into a single entity called White Farm Equipment. By 1975, all 3 historic brand names were dead, replaced by silver-painted White machines that nobody felt anything for. Meanwhile, Brantford Coach and Body, the truck division that had become the biggest semi-trailer manufacturer in Canada, was sold off to Trailmobile. Another piece of the empire gone. 85 years of engineering, 85 years of innovation, 85 years of a family building something they believed in. Retired, not because the company failed, but because financial manipulators decided it was more profitable to kill it. As the Cockshut family themselves put it, Cockshut did not fail. It was a victim of financial manipulators through an unfriendly stock market takeover. And now comes the part of this story that might make you angry. Remember that massive factory complex in Brantford? 50 acres, 1 million square feet of manufacturing space, the most complete plow factory in North America, the place where live PTO was born, where Raymond Loewy's tractors rolled off the line, where 4,200 people had jobs they were proud of? It's a contaminated wasteland. After White took over and shifted production to the US, the Brantford facility began its slow death. White itself went bankrupt in 1985. The factory buildings, already deteriorating, started to collapse. The city of Brantford took ownership of the site, and then things got worse. The last surviving buildings from the original Cockshut complex are the office building and the timekeeper's building, both built in 1903. They were designated as heritage sites under the Ontario Heritage Act in 2002, but the city that was supposed to protect them actually tried to designate and demolish them in 2007. Heritage advocates fought back and won, twice. But the buildings have been sitting empty, abandoned, with water pouring through holes in the roof for years. Arsonists have set fires in sheds adjoining the buildings. Multiple arson incidents have struck other factory structures on the broader Greenwich Mohawk industrial site. The ground itself is classified as a brownfield, too contaminated for redevelopment without expensive soil remediation. Think about what sits on that land. The ghost of a company that helped build this country. The place where James Cockshut's dream became real. Where engineers designed a technology every tractor on Earth uses today, where a family's name meant something to every farmer from Ontario to Montana, and it's rotting. A group called the Canadian Industrial Heritage Centre has fought for years to turn those last surviving buildings into a museum, a place to celebrate Canada's industrial history. But progress has been glacial. Developer deals have fallen through. City Council has voted to end negotiations, and every year that passes, those buildings get more vulnerable to fire, vandalism, and the slow, grinding erasure of time. Between them, Cockshutt White Farm Equipment and Massey Ferguson once employed over 7,000 workers in Brantford. In a city of only 80,000 people, when both companies closed in the 1980s, it didn't just end jobs, it ended a way of life. Brantford went from a roaring industrial center to a city desperately trying to figure out what it was supposed to be next. And across the prairies, in barns and sheds from Manitoba to Montana, old Cockshut tractors are still running. Here's the thing about building something with obsessive quality. It outlasts the people who tried to destroy it. Those Cockshut Model 40s and 50s from the early 1950s, farmers pull them out for tractor pulling competitions today and regularly bolt on engines 3 times the original horsepower because the transmissions and bull gears are so ridiculously overbuilt that they can handle it. 70-year-old drivetrains still taking abuse that would shatter a modern machine. In 1996, exactly 50 years after the Model 30 first rolled off the Brantford line, Canada Post issued a commemorative stamp in its honor, a postage stamp for a tractor. That's the kind of cultural significance we're talking about. The Model 30 wasn't just a product, it was a piece of Canadian identity. And the International Cockshut Club, founded by dedicated collectors and enthusiasts, keeps the flame alive. They host events, they preserve machines, they make sure the name doesn't vanish the way the factory did. Bill Cockshutt, the family member who wrote the definitive book about the company, settled in Wolseley, Saskatchewan. Surrounded by the very prairies, his family's plows had broken open. He spent his later years making sure the record was set straight. I'm proud of the fact that my family and myself were involved in making good products that did a lot for Western farmers, for Brantford, for Canada, and for agriculture as a whole, he said. He pulled out financial records, company documents, engineering drawings, proof that this wasn't some failing enterprise that deserved to die. They conserved cash, they self-funded research and development, they innovated constantly. They were a healthy company that was executed by people who saw a balance sheet and nothing else. So what's the lesson here? Maybe it's that quality isn't always enough. You can build the best product in the world, the best plows, the best tractors, the first live PTO system on the planet, and still lose everything. Because somebody with more money and fewer morals decides your life's work looks better in pieces. Maybe it's that we should pay more attention to the things we're losing. Right now in Brantford, the last physical traces of one of Canada's most innovative companies are crumbling into the dirt, and most Canadians have never even heard the name. Or maybe the lesson is simpler than that. Maybe it's the one James Cockshut whispered into existence in 1877 when he promised to make every item so well that its reputation alone would grow the company. Because 149 years later, his reputation is still growing. Cockshut tractors are still running. The technology they pioneered is still on every tractor ever made, and a small, fierce community of people who remember, collectors, farmers, historians, descendants, are making sure this story doesn't end the way the financiers wanted it to. They wanted Cockshut erased, sold for scrap, forgotten. It didn't work. If this story hit you the way it hit me, Do me a favor, share this video with someone who cares about history, about farming, or about what happens when we let the things that matter get taken apart by people who don't. And if you want more stories like this, stories about forgotten empires, lost innovations, and the people who fought to save them, you know what to do. I'll see you in the next one.